Hello travelers. Histories do not always need to be boring. You can rest here and listen to hilarious histories to drift off to sleep. Tonight, we will explore the topic why you wouldn't last a day in the French Revolution and many more. Before we continue, leave a comment to let me know when and where you are listening to this, and hit the subscribe button, but only if you enjoy what I do here. Let's begin. You wake up in 1793 Paris. There's no Wi-Fi, no coffee, and someone's already screaming outside. Welcome to the French Revolution, the original cancel culture, but with guillotines. You think you could make it through the day? Let's see. Breakfast is a crust of stale bread, if you're lucky. Your neighbors are armed, angry, and one passive-aggressive comment away from accusing you of treason. Oh, and fashion? Yeah, wearing the wrong hat could literally get your head chopped off. This wasn't just a revolution. It was a nationwide meltdown with powdered wigs and public executions. Everyone's starving, nobody trusts anyone, and the government changes faster than your mood on zero sleep. Still think you'd survive? You wouldn't, not even close. But let's find out exactly why. Forget brunch. In revolutionary France, bread wasn't just food, it was life. And when it ran out, so did everyone's patience. By the late 1780s, France's economy was in the gutter. The harvests had failed, and the average Parisian was spending up to 90% of their income just to get a loaf of bread that could double as a blunt weapon. You're not eating to live, you're surviving to chew. And the worst part, the rich were still feasting, while peasants gnawed on burnt crusts. Nobles were throwing dinner parties with so many forks, it looked like a surgical table. Rumors swirled that Queen Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." Spoiler. She probably never said it, but facts don't matter when people are starving and angry. So imagine this. You're standing in line for hours just to maybe buy bread, and when the baker runs out, someone screams, "To the palace." And just like that, you're part of a spontaneous mob marching to Versailles. Not because you wanted to revolt, because you wanted a sandwich. This is how it started. A hunger crisis turned into a revolution. People didn't storm the Bastille for freedom. They stormed it because being broke and hungry makes anyone revolutionary. You thought being hangry made you rude. In 1793, it made you dangerous. Next up, let's talk about why looking too clean could literally get your head chopped off. Let's say you survive breakfast, which is impressive, considering the bread situation. You clean yourself up, throw on your best coat, maybe even a little cologne to mask the scent of existential dread. Congratulations, you've just made yourself a target. During the French Revolution, being stylish was basically the same as screaming, "I'm a privileged aristocrat." The wrong clothes, the wrong accent, even walking too confidently could get you labeled as a counter-revolutionary. The guillotine didn't care if your suit was vintage, it cared that you had one. They called it the Reign of Terror for a reason. Being rich, or just looking like you might own a second pair of shoes, was enough to land you on a cart, headed for a very sharp ending. Powdered wigs, criminal, silk gloves, arrest-worthy. Smelling good? That was suspicious. In fact, people started dressing uglier on purpose. The sans-culottes movement, literally meaning without fancy pants, became a badge of honor. If you wore fine breeches, you might as well have worn a sign that said, "Hi, I'm next." So unless you enjoy being judged for not looking like a sleep-deprived chimney sweep, it's best to rub some dirt on your face, slouch, and mumble your way through the streets. Blend in, or get beheaded trying. Because in revolutionary France, looking fabulous was a capital offense. Let's say you've avoided death by breakfast, and your outfit screams, "Definitely not rich, please ignore me." You decide to blend in, maybe stroll through town and pretend this whole revolution thing will blow over. So you head to the local square, hoping for normalcy. Big mistake. The town square isn't a place. It's a live episode of Who Wants to Be Guillotined Today. Crowds gather daily, not to sell vegetables, but to watch someone lose their head, literally. It's part soap opera, part horror show, and 100% the worst picnic you'll ever attend. Vendors are selling snacks. Seriously. People are munching on apples while heads roll, like it's a halftime show. Kids are watching. There are cheers. Someone yells, "Encore," and you suddenly wonder if everyone here is deeply unwell. Spoiler. Yes. And guess what? You could be next. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you were standing next to someone who did. or because someone doesn't like your face. Accusations fly like pigeons, and if your name ends up on the wrong list, you're not going home, you're going headfirst into revolutionary justice. The irony: people thought the guillotine was humane. Faster, cleaner, less screaming. And sure, it was efficient, like a blender with a vendetta. But humane, that's a stretch, especially when it's being used on poets, bakers, dentists, and your neighbor, who once coughed suspiciously. Basically, walking into a crowd during the French Revolution is like entering a game of dodgeball where the balls are accusations and missing means your neck meets a blade. And just when you think you're safe, the revolution decides to eat itself. Let's talk about betrayal, French style. Here's the fun part. You survived the bread riots, dressed like a sad potato to avoid suspicion, and even managed to sidestep the guillotine crowd. You think, maybe if I support the revolution, I'll be okay. Adorable. Also wrong. Welcome to revolutionary France, where loyalty has a shorter shelf life than milk. You could chant slogans in the street, rat out your landlord for hoarding wine, and name your baby Liberty, and still end up on the chopping block. Why? Because the revolution was allergic to stability. It thrived on paranoia. One week, Robespierre was the hero. The next, he was public enemy number one, with a front row seat to his own execution. Imagine being so good at removing enemies that the government looks around and goes, "Okay, we're out of bad guys. Let's do each other now." That's how fast things turned. People were guillotined for not being revolutionary enough, or for being too revolutionary, or for asking, "Hey, should we maybe slow down the murder a bit?" Spoiler: no, we should not, said the Committee of Public Safety, while sharpening its knives. In a twisted game of political musical chairs, the music stopped every few days, and someone always lost their head. Your best friend could accuse you just to stay safe themselves. Your neighbor might invent a rumor that you once complimented a duke. Even blinking wrong could seem suspicious, if someone was bored enough. And the best part, you could never be sure why you were being arrested. Trials were fast, fake, and furious. The evidence? Mostly vibes. You thought high school drama was bad. Try navigating a regime where gossip gets you executed, and loyalty earns you a front row seat to your own downfall. And as if all this wasn't enough, let's talk about hygiene, or the complete lack of it. You've now seen the bread riots, dodged the fashion police, and survived the public execution lottery. But if you thought the French Revolution was all about political backstabbing and revolutionary wardrobe malfunctions, you haven't met revolutionary hygiene, or rather the complete absence of it. Imagine waking up in a city where bathing is practically a luxury reserved for the rich, and even then, only if they can afford water that isn't muddy. Here, showers are an urban myth. Public baths exist, but they're so overcrowded and unsanitary that people avoid them like rotten cheese. In 1790s Paris, your idea of clean was a quick splash in a dirty basin, and even that might leave you smelling of regret rather than freshness. Medical practices certainly didn't help. Doctors weren't exactly hygiene experts. They'd be thrilled to know you weren't already bleeding out from a scratch. Their remedies ranged from leeches to prayer, and while they claimed to cure everything from headaches to heartache, a good wash wasn't even on the list. Instead, a simple wound could turn septic faster than you could say guillotine, especially when bathed in a cocktail of unfiltered water, cheap wine, and the occasional rat scurrying by. And let's be honest, if you don't mind the aroma of the lower deck of a barge, then bravo, you're truly living the revolutionary spirit. The streets, too, were less charmingly rustic, and more filthy chaos. Overflowing cesspits and stagnant puddles were simply part of the urban landscape. It wasn't unusual to see revolutionaries and commoners alike wading through refuse as they made their way to a protest or public execution. And if you dared to hope for a fresh start, think again. Every gust of wind carried a medley of the city's worst odors. The French Revolution wasn't just a fight for liberty, it was a daily battle against nature's most pungent assaults. In this environment, personal grooming wasn't so much about style as survival. If you looked too pristine, you risked suspicion. If you looked too filthy, well, you might just contract something worse than political paranoia. The delicate balance became a sort of absurd art form. Who knew that in 1790s Paris, managing your personal odor was a revolutionary act in itself? And as if mixing mud on your face wasn't enough, even a stray combing of your hair could be interpreted as an act of vanity, a luxury no true citizen could afford. So the next time you're complaining about a long bus ride or a bad hair day, just remember surviving the French Revolution was less about dodging arrows and more about dodging the stench of decay. If you thought modern life was tough, try living in a city where every breath is a gamble. One whiff could be the last thing you remember before you're swept up in the next uproar. And just when you think you've heard it all, the romance of the era was a special kind of tragic. Let's explore love, betrayal, and the ironic cruelty of relationships in revolutionary France. Let's say, hypothetically, you've survived the hunger, avoided the blade, and managed to not perish from whatever that smell was. You're bruised, unwashed, emotionally exhausted, but alive. And now, your heart, like a confused little baguette, dares to hope. Could there be love in the time of tumbrils? Ah, l'amour. Revolutionary France had no shortage of it. But romance in this era was less candlelight and poetry, and more like Russian roulette with hand-holding. Sure, there were glimmers of passion, flirtation in alleyways, and letters passed secretly under the threat of arrest. But love here came with a plot twist worthy of a tragic opera. Spoiler, the ending was usually public, messy, and had a suspicious number of pitchforks. You see, nothing ruins date night faster than mass paranoia. One moment you're toasting to liberty with someone cute over black market wine. The next you're overhearing them whisper about the new government list, and not in a sexy way. Betrayal was so normalized that even dating was a form of gambling. Swipe right on a Jacobin, congratulations. You've just matched with someone who thinks guillotining poets is a vibe. Marriage? Not exactly the rock-solid institution you'd hope for. The revolution legalized divorce. Yay. Progress. But mostly so people could report their exes faster. And imagine writing irreconcilable differences, when what you really mean is they looked suspiciously monarchist during breakfast. It wasn't just about love, it was about survival. People married to gain protection, or avoid suspicion, and then abandoned each other just as quickly when the winds of politics shifted. In some cases, couples denounced each other in a last-ditch effort to escape their own accusations. It gets darker. The nobility, once dripping in lace and drama, were especially doomed in the romance department. Their arranged marriages became liabilities. Loving the wrong person could make you look politically soft, and sympathizing with your lover's execution. Even worse, some tried to protect their spouses by pretending to hate them. Others watched helplessly as love got decapitated in the name of democracy. You can't even hug goodbye. It's hard to embrace someone while surrounded by guards and revolutionary chants. Even ordinary citizens couldn't trust love. Affection became a risk. Jealousy and survival instincts mixed into a dangerous cocktail. Romeo and Juliet with more mud and way more anonymous accusations. If your partner vanished one morning, odds are they weren't out buying croissants. They were probably accused of treason because someone heard them hum a melody that sounded aristocratic. And don't even try writing a heartfelt letter. If intercepted, your romantic prose could be read as evidence of treason. One misinterpreted, "My heart aches for you," and suddenly you're accused of planning to ache the entire government. Romance, in revolutionary France, was less about roses, and more about roses thrown on your grave after a very public trial. Love still existed, sure, but it was a fragile, flickering thing, like a candle in the wind, surrounded by paranoid revolutionaries holding buckets of water and yelling sedition. But don't worry, if love didn't get you, the prisons would, and they had rules, or at least, the kind of rules that make you scream internally while rats eat your shoes. Let's head there next. Congratulations. You've been accused, accurately or not, of being an enemy of the revolution. Maybe someone overheard you saying you missed butter. Maybe your neighbor just doesn't like your face. Maybe you blinked too slowly during a patriotic speech. Whatever the reason, you've won yourself an all-expenses-paid trip to a revolutionary prison, which is less orange is the new black, and more bread mold is the new dinner. Let's start with the ambiance. Revolutionary prisons were overcrowded, disease-ridden, and smelled like a cursed soup. Think less jail cell and more rotting wine cellar, but with emotional trauma. You could be sharing a tiny room with 20 others, all of whom were wondering if the cough from the corner meant tuberculosis or just despair. And if you're imagining cold stone walls, iron bars, and a stoic silence broken only by the echo of dripping water, great. Now add screaming, lots of it, from the rats. And maybe also from you. You know it's bad when you're the least dangerous thing in your own cell. But it wasn't just the conditions. It was the psychological dread. You didn't know if or when you'd be called for trial, and trial is a generous word. This was more like revolutionary speed dating. You walk in, someone reads your name, a few vague accusations get tossed around, and boom, you're guilty. The judge barely looks up from his stale bread. Guilty of what? You ask. Existing too confidently, they reply. Guillotine o'clock, and here's the most terrifying part. The guards didn't even have to be cruel. They just had to show up and say your name. Once you heard it, that was it. A few hours later, your head was playing catch-up with the rest of your body. It got to the point where prisoners made dark jokes about trying to fake their own deaths just to get some sleep. There were, believe it or not, cliques inside the prisons. Aristocrats, who still insisted on tea time. Artists sketching morbid cartoons of their own doom. Wannabe philosophers arguing over whether dying nobly was more important than staying alive, awkwardly. And of course, a few smug individuals who genuinely believed they'd be spared because they once waved at Robespierre from across the street. Spoiler, they were not. Meals, if you could call them that. You were lucky to get a chunk of mouldy bread and some water that looked like it had feelings. Hunger gnawed at everyone, which made people edgy, unpredictable, and occasionally convinced their bedbug bites were divine punishment for past sins. But the real heartbreak, the ones who believed they'd be released, people clinging to hope, whispering about rumors of pardons, of connections, of mercy. And then their name would be called anyway. That's the cruel rhythm of revolutionary justice. Hope dangling in front of you, like a carrot tied to a guillotine blade. And even if you survived for weeks, months, there was no guarantee of freedom. The calendar flipped toward death, with the reliability of a drunk fortune teller. Sometimes they'd round up dozens at once just to clear the books. You'd be swept out with the rest, marched to the cart, and paraded through the jeering crowds like a human parade float for everything gone wrong with humanity. But hey, at least it wasn't boring. Next up, we ride with you to the execution itself, the final stop on your incredibly short, incredibly stressful revolutionary bucket list. Grab your dignity and maybe a scarf. It's about to get windy. So you made it out of the prison alive. Well, as alive as anyone could after weeks of questionable food and existential dread. Now, it's time for the pièce de résistance, the guillotine. The world's most efficient and ironically polite way to say, thanks for coming, but it's time to leave. The guillotine wasn't just a machine, it was a cultural icon, a grim celebrity that stole the spotlight at every public execution. If you thought a roller coaster was terrifying, try the one-and-done ride where your head and body part ways faster than you can say liberté, égalité, fraternité. Spoiler alert, it's a bit more permanent than your average theme park. Public executions were the social events of the day, except with a lot more screaming and a lot less cotton candy. Families would pack the streets, not for entertainment exactly, but because, if you missed the spectacle, you'd miss the gossip for weeks. People even bet on how long the condemned would keep their cool. I give him 2 seconds before he yells something embarrassing, was a common wager, and the condemned, well, there was no last meal or farewell tour. Your final moments were more about awkward silence and praying you didn't mess up the drop and embarrass the executioner. Imagine your head being separated from your body, but somehow still hoping to give a good final impression. Talk about pressure, but here's the twisted irony. The guillotine was invented to be humane and egalitarian. Before it, executions were messy, painful, and often reserved for the poor or unlucky. The rich sometimes got fancy swordsmen or hanging, which could take a while and was less dignified. The guillotine promised a quick, supposedly painless death, equal justice for all, except you still lost your head. And in true revolutionary style, the guillotine was both feared and oddly popular. It became a symbol of terror, justice, and the revolution's brutal sense of fairness. It even got nicknames like the National Razor, which sounds like a hip new grooming product, but was anything but. If you think surviving hunger, betrayal, prison, and public humiliation was rough, wait until you face the guillotine. But hey, at least you won't have to worry about the next part of your day, because, well, there isn't one. But don't think the terror ended with the blade. The revolution's chaos lingered, infecting lives long after the crowds dispersed. Let's dive into how the French Revolution left scars that lasted centuries, and why you wouldn't want to stick around to see that either. So you survived the guillotine. Well, technically you didn't, but stick with me. The French Revolution wasn't just about heads rolling. Literally, it cast a long, gnarly shadow over France and the world. If you think surviving the revolution meant freedom, think again. It was more like jumping out of the frying pan and into a vat of boiling political soup. After the Reign of Terror, France didn't exactly throw a victory party with champagne and fireworks. Instead, it descended into chaos, power struggles, and enough drama to make a reality TV show jealous. The streets were littered with the ghosts of ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, all looking a bit worse for wear. The new rulers swapped places faster than a bad game of musical chairs. One minute you had Robespierre's gang, the next it was the Directory, then Napoleon crashing the party like an uninvited cousin with an army. Political paranoia became the national pastime, right after breadlines, and complaining about how nothing was ever going to be simple again. And what about everyday folks like you? The revolution promised a better life, but instead, many got stuck with economic hardship, food shortages, and enough suspicion to make Big Brother look like an amateur. Neighbors watched neighbors like hawks, wondering who might be an enemy of the people hiding behind that innocent baguette. Families were torn apart, literally and figuratively. Spouses disappeared overnight, friends turned informants, and trust became a luxury few could afford. Love stories? Sure, but they came with the constant risk of a midnight knock on the door, followed by a one-way trip to prison, or worse. Talk about relationship goals. Yet, amidst the chaos, new ideas took root. Ideas about democracy, rights and justice that would echo far beyond France's borders. The revolution's fiery spirit inspired countless movements worldwide, even if its own backyard was still smoking. But here's the kicker. If you thought the revolution was a one-time event, think again. Its aftermath shaped centuries of politics, wars, and social upheaval. The French Revolution didn't just change France, it rewrote the playbook on how people fight for freedom, for better or worse. So, would you last a day in the French Revolution? Probably not. Between the constant danger, the shifting alliances, and the sheer unpredictability of life and death, it was less a historical event, and more a chaotic roller coaster with no safety bar. And honestly, maybe it's better to watch from the sidelines, popcorn in hand, rather than be a contestant on that wild ride. Looking back, the French Revolution reads like the wildest soap opera ever written, complete with betrayal, starvation, neck-chilling justice, and more plot twists than a season of your favorite thriller. But unlike your favorite binge-worthy show, this one wasn't scripted for entertainment. It was raw, chaotic, and downright deadly. You'd be juggling hunger, disease, and constant fear, like a circus performer on a unicycle. Except there's no safety net, and the crowd is more likely to throw rotten vegetables than applause. Every relationship came with a built-in betrayal clause, and trust no one wasn't just advice, it was survival strategy number one. And let's not forget the guillotine, the era's ultimate party pooper, ready to turn your day from meh to off with your head in seconds. It was the revolution's way of keeping everyone on their toes, or heads rather. Yet, for all the horror and heartbreak, the revolution sparked ideas that still shape our world today. Concepts of liberty, equality, and fraternity might have been hammered out in blood and chaos, but they planted seeds that grew into something much bigger. So, would you last a day? Heck no. But that's what makes it endlessly fascinating. A brutal reminder of how far people will go for change, and how messy that journey can get. Maybe it's better to learn from history's wild ride, rather than sign up for a starring role. And hey, if you ever feel like your life is complicated, just remember, at least you don't have to worry about which revolutionary committee is deciding your fate today. That's progress worth smiling about. Imagine brushing your teeth in the morning, rinsing with a glowing mouthwash, and thinking, tastes like health and mild nuclear fallout. Welcome to the early 1900s, where radioactive elements weren't seen as dangerous. They were seen as luxurious. Yes, luxurious. Like a spa day with gamma rays. Before people feared radiation, they drank it, bathed in it, slathered it on their gums, and they didn't stop until their jaws literally fell off. Back in the early 20th century, radium was the iPhone of the era. Mysterious, expensive, trendy, and probably not something you should sleep next to. After Marie and Pierre Curie discovered radium, people became obsessed with its glow. Not metaphorically. Radium literally glowed in the dark. And humans, being curious little gremlins, immediately said, "We should put that in our mouths." Enter the first wave of radiation wellness. It was marketed as a health boost, an energy enhancer, a miracle cure for anything from arthritis to baldness. And it wasn't fringe pseudoscience. This stuff was sold in department stores next to cologne and toothpaste. There was Tho Radia, a French beauty brand that proudly advertised radioactive face cream for radiant skin, of course. And if the idea of glowing cheeks wasn't enough, you could also snag a tube of radioactive toothpaste. Imagine scrubbing your teeth with nuclear mint. Ah yes, nothing says fresh breath like uranium ions. Oh, and don't worry, children's toothpaste also contained trace amounts of radium. Because if anything builds strong teeth, it's bone-weakening isotopes. But if you really wanted to impress your wealthy friends and slowly destroy your insides with class, you drank Radithor. This was marketed as a health tonic, essentially fancy bottled water infused with radium and thorium. Two radioactive elements your body definitely should not be absorbing like it's a spa smoothie. Radithor was advertised as the answer to low energy, low libido, and nervous disorders, which in 1920s medicine was shorthand for literally anything. Stressed, Radithor. Sad, Radithor. Human, probably needs some Radithor. And then came Eben Byers, a wealthy industrialist, champion golfer, and full-time guy who should have read the warning label. Byers drank 3 bottles of Radithor a day for years. At first, he claimed it made him feel amazing. His aches went away. He had energy. His love life glowed. But eventually, so did his skull. Byers began suffering from a condition known as radium jaw, where the bones in his face literally disintegrated. By the time doctors examined him, his entire jaw had to be removed, and holes had begun to form in his skull. He died in 1932, buried in a lead-lined coffin because his body was still dangerously radioactive. His case made national headlines, and suddenly, drinking radium wasn't trendy anymore. It was, as it turned out, a spectacularly dumb idea. After Byers' death, the Federal Trade Commission finally cracked down on Radithor and similar products, not out of a moral panic, but because one rich guy got skeletonized in slow motion. That's how early regulation worked. It's fine, until a millionaire melts. The tragedy of it all? Scientists already knew radiation was dangerous. Marie Curie herself had suffered from prolonged exposure. Her notebooks are still radioactive today. But the public didn't listen to warnings. They listened to marketing. The glow meant power, wealth, vitality. They didn't want facts. They wanted miracles in a bottle, until the miracles started eating their faces. But wait, there's toothpaste. Even after Radithor was pulled off shelves, radioactive toothpaste kept brushing on. Germany was a key hotspot for these nuclear dental products. A brand called Doramad advertised its radium-laced toothpaste as giving you a pleasant feeling of youth and freshness. They said it helped disinfect your mouth and protect your enamel. Technically that's true because you'd eventually lose your entire mouth. Imagine smiling at your crush with the confidence of a man who glows in the dark and the underlying dental structure of a decaying tree stump. The logic was simple. If something's powerful enough to destroy cells, surely it can kill bacteria too. Right. Of course, it also destroyed healthy tissue, gums, tongues, and anything else that thought it was safe. So let's recap. People drank radiation, brushed their teeth with radiation, applied radiation to their faces before bed, and considered glowing skin to be a positive side effect. This wasn't ancient history. It was 100 years ago. Your great-grandparents could have been rubbing nuclear waste into their paws with pride, thinking they were fighting aging when really, they were just preheating their own skeletons. But hey, at least their smiles were killer. Fashion that fights back, flammable pajamas and death dresses. Picture this, you're a 1950s kid, drifting off to sleep in your brand new cartoon pajamas. They're cozy, they're colourful, and they're basically soaked in rocket fuel. If you rolled too close to a candle, you weren't just getting singed, you were turning into a human sparkler. And that's just bedtime. Daytime fashion had its own horror show, poisonous dyes, explosive hoop skirts, and fabrics that literally ate your body alive. Welcome to the golden age of deadly fashion, where being stylish could kill you faster than a speeding corset. In the mid-20th century, synthetic fabrics were all the rage. Nylon, rayon, and acetate were shiny, cheap, and lightweight. Everything you'd want in a fun, mass-produced pair of pajamas for your child, except, oh right, they were also insanely flammable. These materials could ignite in seconds and melt onto skin like a nightmare cheese topping. We're talking spontaneous combustion vibes here. There are recorded cases where a child brushed past a stove or heater and the pajamas instantly turned into a full-body fireball. Think pop, crackle, third-degree burns. And the worst part, no one really did anything about it at first, because companies were like, hey, it's not the pajamas' fault the kids are flammable, maybe stop lighting matches around them. Yeah, great advice, Steve. It wasn't until the 1970s, decades into the fabric firefest, that regulations finally kicked in. The US passed the Flammable Fabrics Act. The name really says it all, forcing manufacturers to stop using fabrics that could double as emergency kindling. But before that, bedtime was less sweet dreams and more spontaneous human combustion. Children's edition. Now, rewind to the 1800s, the Victorian era, an age of elegance, romance, and wearing an entire sofa's worth of fabric at all times. The Victorians didn't play when it came to fashion. Your average upper-class woman wore enough clothing to camouflage as a heavily decorated antique chair. Layers of linen, muslin, silk, and whalebone made you look like royalty and move like a clumsy chandelier. But what they didn't know, or more accurately, what they politely ignored, was that their fashion could kill them, slowly, painfully, with a flourish of ruffles. Let's begin with the green dress of doom. Ah, yes, the death dress. Popular in the mid-1800s, these gowns were dyed a brilliant, luminous green using, you guessed it, arsenic. Specifically, Scheele's green and Paris green, two pigments that achieved that vibrant emerald sheen, and a bonus side effect of poisoning you through your skin. Women who wore these gowns would often develop sores, lose hair, vomit, and in some documented cases, die. Seamstresses who worked with the fabric day in and day out fared even worse. They inhaled the powdered dye and suffered chronic arsenic poisoning. But hey, you looked stunning on the way out. Even Charles Dickens commented on it in his writing, which tells you how bad it was, because when the author of Bleak House says something is too dark, you've gone off the rails. The crinoline, also known as the portable bonfire. Next, let's talk about the crinoline. This was the petticoat cage structure women wore under their dresses to make them puff out like oversized cupcakes. A fashionable look. Yes, a good idea around candles and fireplaces. Absolutely not. Crinolines were made of stiff fabric and often horsehair, which was highly flammable. Combine that with the fact that Victorian homes were filled with open flames, candles, fireplaces, gas lamps, and you have the ultimate fire hazard. There are stories, many stories of women brushing too close to the hearth and their dresses catching fire. The skirts were so massive that once ignited, they became literal rings of fire. One tragic headline in 1863 read "Death by Crinoline." No, that wasn't a horror novel. That was the obituary. Women sometimes burned alive before anyone could reach them, because by the time you got through the 8 layers of flaming hoop skirt, it was already too late. It's fashion meets Final Destination. Lead, mercury, and hats that make you mad. Let's not forget the gentleman in all this. Men's fashion also had its moments of chemically induced chaos, particularly hats. Ever heard the phrase, mad as a hatter? That's not just an Alice in Wonderland joke. It's historical. In the 18th and 19th centuries, hat makers used mercury nitrate in the process of turning animal fur into felt. Repeated exposure to mercury caused tremors, mood swings, hallucinations, and severe neurological damage. Hatters became anxious, twitchy, and sometimes violently psychotic. Not the best sales pitch for your haberdashery. Come in for the latest styles. Pay no attention to my vibrating hands and screaming hallucinations. The takeaway: if you look good, you might die. Whether it was pajamas that turned kids into torch pops or evening gowns soaked in arsenic, one thing's clear: fashion didn't care about your lifespan. Style over safety. Always. Poisoned by your favorite dress. That's just elegance with a body count. Pajamas that make you flammable? That's childhood with extra sizzle. Hallucinating from your hat? That's just 19th century drip. Today we complain when the tag on our shirt is itchy. Back then your shirt might kill you and the tailor would say, "But did you see how it drapes?" Ah, childhood. That magical time of scraped knees, sugar highs, and playing with toys that could maim, blind, or mildly irradiate you. If you were a kid in mid-20th century America, you lived in a wonderland of corporate recklessness and complete parental oblivion. It was an era where toy companies said things like, "Safety? Never heard of her," and parents shrugged and said, "Hey, it builds character." You weren't just playing, you were surviving. Lawn darts, aka the javelin of doom. Let's start with the classic lawn darts. These were sold as a wholesome backyard family game, a fun outdoor bonding activity, but in reality, you were throwing 10-inch metal missiles into the air and hoping they came down somewhere near the target and not your cousin's skull. Each dart was weighted with a sharp, spear-like tip. You were supposed to toss them gently. But let's be honest, what kid has ever thrown anything gently? These things were banned in the US in 1988, after causing thousands of injuries and several deaths. But the warning signs were there from the start, like when your neighbor's game ended with someone yelling, "Oh God, my foot." There's something haunting about a product where the safety instructions were basically, don't hit a person, or animal, or window, or car, or, just maybe don't buy this at all. Miniature guillotines, the gift of execution. Believe it or not, in the early 20th century, it was totally acceptable to give your child a miniature guillotine. For educational purposes, of course. The idea was to teach kids about the French Revolution, because nothing says happy birthday like reenacting the reign of terror in your living room. These weren't harmless plastic replicas either. Some models had working blades. You could decapitate your doll, a carrot, or your sense of innocence. And in a few horrifying cases, kids lost fingers. The real revolution was in the emergency room. Honestly, it's kind of poetic. Little Timmy decapitates a teddy bear and learns a valuable lesson about monarchy and bloodshed. Thanks, Mom. The Atomic Energy Lab. Now with real uranium. Oh yes, this one actually existed. In 1950, the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab hit toy store shelves. It was marketed as a science kit for young aspiring physicists. The set included a Geiger counter, cloud chamber, various tools, and most memorably, 4 types of actual uranium ore. Yes, uranium. Radioactive uranium. Because what better way to teach kids about science than by giving them materials banned from carry-on luggage? The kit proudly claimed that it was completely safe, if used as directed, which is kind of like saying, this rattlesnake is totally chill, if you don't poke it. To be fair, the radiation levels were low, but still, we're talking about literal radioactive material being handed out like Lego blocks. Imagine getting that under the tree. Wow, Timmy got a Nintendo, and I got mild radiation exposure. The kit was pulled from shelves within a year, but not before making a generation of kids slightly glowier than intended. Let's shift to the 1960s for a moment, and talk about creepy crawlers, a toy that let kids make rubbery bugs using a hot metal mold and a goopy substance called plasti goop. That's right, you heated this mystery goo in a literal open-face electric oven that could reach 300 degrees Fahrenheit, with no safety guard, insulation, or adult supervision required. What could go wrong? Burns, for starters. Thousands of them. The original thing maker had no real safety mechanisms, which meant tiny hands and molten goo met on the regular. But you can't really complain when the toy literally came with tongs. Creepy crawlers were so beloved that multiple reboots have come and gone, with one major difference. Modern versions don't let kids handle molten chemicals and unshielded heating elements. Soft. Let's not forget the holy trinity of kid weaponry. Cap guns, which sparked loudly enough to start fires. BB guns, which turned every neighborhood into a low-budget Saving Private Ryan. And chemistry sets that taught kids both science and how to make minor explosives in the basement. Some chemistry kits literally came with potassium permanganate, sulfur, and instructions for building rudimentary bombs. The only thing missing was an Al-Qaeda recruitment brochure, and the best part? Nobody batted an eye. Your parents were just happy you were playing quietly with something that might detonate. Flash forward to now, and you'll find children's toys that have been so scrubbed for safety, they barely count as fun. Modern toys are sealed, tested, and wrapped in enough plastic to survive a moon landing. The most dangerous thing in a modern toy box is a loose Lego brick under your foot. Meanwhile, back in the 60s, your toy could explode, impale, poison, or irradiate you, and people would still call it America's greatest generation. If you made it out of childhood in the mid-20th century, with all your fingers, working eyesight, and no glowing body parts, congratulations, you were a warrior, a battle-hardened survivor of the golden age of corporate negligence. The iron lung, when inventions saved you by terrifying you. First, imagine you're a kid in the 1950s. You have a cold, but it's not just any cold. Your legs feel heavy, your back aches, and then you can't breathe. Not just wheezing or gasping, your lungs literally stop doing their job. Congratulations, you've got polio, and now you're about to spend the next who knows how long inside a machine that looks like it belongs in a horror movie directed by a steampunk engineer. Welcome to the world of the iron lung, a life-saving invention that was also a claustrophobe's worst nightmare. What even is an iron lung? In technical terms, an iron lung is a negative pressure ventilator. In non-technical terms, it's a giant metal tube that sucks and pushes air in and out of your body by vacuuming your entire torso, like a Victorian Dyson machine. You were slid into this thing like a ham into a can, just your head sticking out, with a soft rubber collar around your neck to form a seal. The rest of your body, your arms, legs, everything, trapped inside a sealed chamber that literally breathed for you because polio had paralyzed your chest muscles. The machine would rhythmically decompress and compress the air pressure around your chest, mimicking the natural act of inhaling and exhaling. It was brilliant, revolutionary, and horrifying. During the early 20th century, polio was public enemy number one. It struck quickly, often with no warning, and could leave kids paralyzed or even kill them by shutting down the muscles that controlled breathing. Hospitals scrambled to treat the growing waves of patients, and suddenly iron lungs were everywhere. Entire wards were filled with rows of these clunky mechanical coffins, hissing and wheezing like a factory full of sad robots. It was effective, but also incredibly grim. There were kids who spent decades inside these machines, sometimes only getting out for short breaks, or not at all. Nurses would read to them, feed them, and even play games, all while they lay motionless, encased in steel. Imagine being a teenager, stuck inside a machine that makes Darth Vader's breathing sound like a whisper. Try going through puberty like that. Imagine your crush visiting, and you have to flirt with nothing but head movements, and iron lung-approved one-liners like, "Wanna play a rousing game of look at the ceiling with me?" The iron lung was a mechanical marvel, until it wasn't. If the electricity went out, so did your ability to breathe. That's right, these machines were entirely dependent on the grid. So when a blackout happened, nurses sprinted through wards manually pumping bellows to keep dozens of patients from suffocating. It was like CPR, but with the added thrill of being totally mechanical and extremely terrifying. There were even moments when machines would get jammed and panicked hospital staff would try to troubleshoot the world's most critical vacuum cleaner with screwdrivers, duct tape, and pure adrenaline. Fun fact, people in iron lungs had to learn to cough strategically, using the pressure wave to clear their throats, because you couldn't exactly sit up and hack into a tissue. No lungs, no leverage, just the rhythm of the machine and the power of awkward timing. What do you do when your body is frozen in a metal tank for months or years? You adapt. Patients learned to read books with special page-turning wands, write letters with pencils in their mouths, and communicate through mirrors suspended above their heads. Some became pen pals, others finished school. One woman even earned a law degree while living inside her lung. That's right, you're out of excuses, Chad. In fact, some people made entire lives in the machine. There are still a few survivors today who've lived most of their lives in one, and have incredible stories of resilience. But still, there's no denying it. This machine saved lives by literally scaring the breath back into you. Thankfully, the polio vaccine arrived in the 1950s, and polio cases plummeted. As fewer people needed mechanical ventilation, the iron lung became a symbol of a past most people were eager to forget. It didn't go quietly, though. You still hear stories of aging machines clunking along in basements, maintained by the very people they saved. These survivors often have to fix their own machines, because no one else knows how they work anymore. Imagine doing a Home Depot run for iron lung parts. Yes. Hi, I'm looking for a 1940s negative pressure crank valve. Do you have that in stock? The iron lung stands as one of the most chilling yet heroic pieces of medical history, a terrifying metal cocoon that gave thousands of people a second chance at life, even if it meant sacrificing comfort, freedom, and the ability to sneeze without causing a minor air pressure crisis. It's a reminder that sometimes the line between life-saving and nightmare fuel is thinner than a rubber neck collar, and with that hissing metallic lullaby echoing in your brain, we roll into asbestos, the coziest death blanket ever invented. Imagine a material so versatile it could insulate your house, fireproof your clothing, line your toaster, and pad your cigarette filter, and all you had to do was ignore the part where it killed you slowly from the inside out. That's asbestos for you, humanity's favorite fluffy death mineral. We thought we were wrapping ourselves in safety. Turns out, we were hugging a pillow stuffed with microscopic knives. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral that's been used since ancient times. The Greeks noticed that it didn't burn, which was awesome. They also noticed that their slaves who worked with the stuff coughed themselves into the afterlife, which was slightly less awesome. But hey, who listens to coughing slaves? Right, flash forward a couple of millennia to the late 1800s and early 1900s, and suddenly, asbestos was everywhere. Why? Because it had all the things we love in a product. Fireproof, waterproof, cheaps, easy to mine, makes you feel like a wizard controlling fire with science. It was used in insulation, brakes, pipes, ceiling tiles, floor tiles, ship hulls, ironing boards, blankets, and even Christmas decorations. Nothing says festive like lung shredding tinsel. One of the most absurd uses of asbestos was in fake snow. In the early 20th century, if you wanted a white Christmas in California, you didn't wait for a fluke snowstorm. You sprinkled asbestos on your tree. That's right. Families would toss handfuls of asbestos around the living room, like glitter. Kids would play in it. Dogs would sniff it. Dad would smoke a pipe next to it. And the whole time, everyone was inhaling tiny, indestructible fibers that would lodge in their lungs forever like microscopic porcupines. Even Hollywood got in on the act. The fake snow in The Wizard of Oz, asbestos. Judy Garland sang, "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas," and the film crew said, "No problem, we'll just poison the entire cast." Here's where it gets sinister. By the 1930s and 40s, people started noticing a troubling pattern. Workers in asbestos mines and factories were getting sick. Not like I have a cold sick, like your lungs have turned into stiff concrete sick. The disease, asbestosis. Basically, those little fibers got stuck deep in your lungs and never left. Your immune system tried to fight them off, but couldn't, so instead it just panicked and filled your lungs with scar tissue, making it harder and harder to breathe. Then came mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive cancer, almost exclusively caused by asbestos exposure. The prognosis? Hey, remember that cozy fireproof insulation you loved? Well, now it's killing you in the most brutal way possible. Happy retirement. You'd think the moment people realized this stuff was murder in mineral form, it would have been banned. But that's not how 20th century capitalism works. Asbestos companies launched a massive cover-up, funding fake research, bullying whistleblowers, and telling workers that the coughing was probably just allergies. For decades, they managed to keep the profits flowing while people wheezed and died by the thousands. It wasn't until the 1970s and 1980s that governments around the world started to take the asbestos threat seriously. But even now, asbestos isn't fully banned in the United States. That's right, it's still legal in some applications, because apparently, we like to live dangerously. Let's run through some everyday items that once contained asbestos. Hair dryers. Nothing like blow-drying your hair with a pocket volcano. Toaster ovens, toasty bread with a side of carcinogens. Cigarette filters, because apparently lung cancer needed a little boost. Play-Doh-like modeling clays. Childhood creativity meets respiratory failure. Gas mask filters during WWI. Soldiers breathed better while slowly dying anyway. Asbestos was also in military ships, school buildings, courtrooms, hotels, and basically every home built before 1980. So if you've ever renovated your grandparents' bathroom, congratulations, you might have accidentally excavated a forbidden tomb of doom. Asbestos teaches us one vital lesson. Just because something looks soft and helpful doesn't mean it won't destroy you from the inside out. It also reminds us that sometimes humanity's greatest inventions are just beautiful lies wrapped in dusty poison. We put asbestos in baby clothes for crying out loud. We trusted the coziest little killer the earth ever coughed up, and we're still living with the consequences. Killer toys, the most dangerous things ever. Put in a Happy Meal hook. Toys are supposed to be fun, innocent, harmless little distractions to keep kids from trying to microwave forks. But for most of the 20th century, toy manufacturers seemed to believe children were tiny daredevils who needed less supervision and more explosives. If you ever wanted to see Darwinism applied to birthday gifts, buckle up. We're diving into the most hilariously horrifying toys ever unleashed upon unsuspecting children. Once upon a time, no one really expected toys to be safe. Kids were tough. They drank from garden hoses, rode bikes without helmets, and apparently needed toys that could double as medieval weapons. Safety regulations. Prift. That was just parenting with extra steps. Manufacturers saw a market and said, let's give kids adventure, real adventure, with knives. And so began the golden age of killer toys. Imagine playing horseshoes, but instead of tossing a metal U at a stake, you're throwing a foot-long steel missile straight into the air and hoping it doesn't land in your cousin's skull. That was the magic of lawn darts, or jarts, as the manufacturers called them. These bad boys were marketed as wholesome backyard fun in the 1950s, 1980s, but they quickly became the lead cause of impromptu head surgeries at family barbecues. They looked like toy spears, had weighted metal tips, and could absolutely pierce a watermelon, or Timmy. Over 6,000 injuries and several tragic deaths later, they were finally banned in the US in 1988, but not before ruining a few childhoods and family cookouts. Fun fact, some people still collect vintage lawn darts, because nothing says nostalgia like potential cranial trauma. What's better than a science kit for kids? One that includes actual radioactive materials, released in 1950 by the A.C. Gilbert Company, the same people who made the Erector set. The U-238 Atomic Energy Lab came with 4 uranium-bearing ore samples, a cloud chamber, a Geiger counter, and a booklet titled How to Prospect for Uranium. Because, obviously, little Billy was going to strike it rich, and also maybe get leukemia. The lab proudly advertised that it was safe, which in 1950s terms meant the side effects won't kick in until you're 35. Parents actually bought this. They handed their children a box of uranium and said, "Have fun, sweetie. Just don't spill any glowing rocks in the carpet." Only about 5,000 were sold before the company realized maybe kids don't need fission-based fun. But it remains a shining and slightly glowing example of how far people were willing to go in the name of education. The original Creepy Crawlers toy, launched in the 1960s, was like an easy bake oven for kids who preferred bugs over cupcakes. You poured plasti goop into metal molds and cooked it using an open hot plate that could reach 400 degrees Fahrenheit. No safety shield, no auto shut-off, just bare metal, boiling plastic, and 10-year-old fingers. It was awesome and horrifying. Kids loved it. Parents, not so much. First-degree burns became a sort of rite of passage. The smell of melting bug goo filled many a suburban living room. Eventually, after enough scorched hands and outraged letters, the toy was re-released with slightly more safety features. Red, not as immediately skin-melting. In the 1990s, toy makers got clever. The Snack Time Cabbage Patch Kid could eat plastic snacks by using motorized jaws that chewed and slurped the food into its backpack. Unfortunately, the doll couldn't tell the difference between fake fries and real hair. Kids would lovingly feed their dolls, only to realize too late that their long locks, or worse their siblings, had become a chew toy. The doll's mouth had no off switch. Once it started eating, it wasn't stopping for anything short of a full battery removal. Hair was pulled, tears were shed. Childhoods were mildly traumatized. Mattel eventually recalled the dolls in 1997, after enough lawsuits and unintentional haircuts hit the news. When the original Battlestar Galactica toys were released in the late 1970s, they came with tiny spring-loaded missiles. You could load one up, fire it at your friends, and feel like a space commander. Then a kid choked to death on a missile. It was a tragic wake-up call, and Mattel quickly redesigned the toy to make the missiles non-removable. But for a while there, children were fighting interstellar wars and unknowingly risking a one-way trip to the emergency room. Let's not forget the classics: lead paint, glass marbles in baby rattles, and BB guns with no eye protection. Basically, the 1950s were a golden age of here, chew on this, and don't ask questions. Your toy fire truck, lead. Your toy soldier, lead. That cute little red rocking horse, lead, and splinters. But hey, at least it built character, or lead poisoning. Sometimes both. So what did we learn? Toys, like everything else in history, followed the sacred rule of what could possibly go wrong. And the answer was often everything. We gave kids nuclear material, spears, fire, chemicals, and predatory dolls. And somehow we're surprised when Gen X turned out a little weird. Today, toys are safer, softer, rounder. Choking hazards are labeled, batteries are secured, radioactive isotopes are no longer included. But a part of us still misses the Wild West of toy making, when danger was part of the fun, and every playdate was a trip to the ER waiting to happen. Marie Curie didn't just discover radium, she practically invented the glow stick of science. Imagine being so brilliant that you literally light up a room and also slowly glow in the dark yourself. Because spoiler alert, radiation wasn't exactly the spa treatment she thought it was. From a young woman with big dreams in a world that said science isn't for girls, to a double Nobel Prize winner, whose discoveries changed medicine, energy, and the entire way we understand the atom. Marie Curie's story is equal parts genius, grit, and glowing tragedy. But buckle up, this isn't just a feel-good tale of scientific triumph. It's also a story of danger, heartbreak, and a woman who burned so bright she left a mark on history and on her own health that no one could ignore. Marie Curie's story begins not in a glamorous Paris lab, but in the chilly city of Warsaw, Poland, then part of the Russian Empire, where opportunities for women, especially in science, were about as common as a unicorn riding a bicycle. Born Maria Skłodowska in 1867, she grew up in a family that prized education but faced crushing political oppression. Schools for girls were scarce, so Marie's early learning mostly came from secret underground classes, basically the OG hack your education move. Her parents were teachers, pushing her to soak up knowledge, but when it came time for university, Marie hit a wall. Poland's universities wouldn't admit women, so she did the only reasonable thing: she packed up and moved to Paris. There, she enrolled at the Sorbonne, home to some of the brightest minds of the era. But as a foreigner and a woman, she was often the odd one out. To put it lightly, the competition was fierce, and the living conditions were, let's say, rustic. She lived in a tiny, freezing garret room, surviving on little more than bread and tea, because student loans weren't a thing, and neither was Wi-Fi to order delivery. Despite these challenges, Marie's determination was unshakable. She excelled in physics and math, topping her classes, which probably confused her professors, because who expects a woman in the 1890s to be this good at math? The truth is, Marie wasn't just good, she was extraordinary. But brilliance alone didn't shield her from the sexist attitudes of the time. Female scientists were often dismissed or patronized, and Marie had to fight just to be taken seriously. This tough start laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most groundbreaking scientific careers in history. But little did she know, the real challenges were just beginning. When Marie Curie first dipped her toes into the world of science, she had no idea she was about to uncover something that would literally shake the foundations of physics and make her the glow-in-the-dark celebrity of the 20th century. It all started with a mysterious element called uranium, which had caught the attention of a physicist named Henri Becquerel a few years earlier, when he noticed that uranium salts emitted rays that could expose photographic plates. But what Marie and her husband Pierre Curie discovered went way beyond uranium. They found that the element was releasing some kind of invisible energy, all on its own. Marie coined a brand new term for it: radioactivity. If you think about it, that's a pretty badass move. Naming a phenomenon that no one fully understood yet. It's like stumbling upon a weird new dance move and deciding to call it the radioactive shuffle. But the real magic came when Marie began isolating new elements responsible for this strange energy. She painstakingly processed tons of pitchblende ore, a mineral that was basically rock soup mixed with radioactive goodness, in her cramped, poorly ventilated lab. There were no fancy machines or safety guidelines, just a lot of grinding, boiling and testing, all while being surrounded by invisible rays that would later earn her a very unfortunate health bill. After months of work, she announced the discovery of 2 new elements, polonium, named after her beloved homeland Poland, and radium, named for its intense radiation. Radium in particular was so powerful it could glow in the dark, which led to some seriously weird side effects. Imagine scientists working late at night, their labware casting an eerie blue-green glow, like a scene out of a sci-fi horror movie, except the horror part wasn't special effects, it was real. In fact, no one back then realized just how dangerous radium was. Marie and Pierre often handled it with their bare hands, sometimes even licking their test tubes to better shape them. Yes, really. Exposing themselves to doses of radiation that today would send health inspectors into a full panic. But back then, radiation was still a mystery, sometimes seen almost like a magic force rather than a deadly hazard. The discovery made waves around the world, literally lighting up scientific communities with excitement and confusion. Marie's research opened new doors in physics and medicine, leading to the development of cancer treatments and a deeper understanding of atomic structure. But it also came with a price few expected. Marie Curie's long exposure to radioactive materials would later contribute to her declining health, making her a tragic figure whose brilliance came with a glowing downside. But what Marie's discovery truly proved was that science wasn't just about boring experiments in labs. It could shake the very core of what we thought was possible, revealing secrets hidden deep within the fabric of the universe. And for a woman who started life in a small Polish city with no access to formal education, that was nothing short of revolutionary. Marie Curie's lab was less a shining temple of science and more a dim, cramped dungeon, where brilliance and danger coexisted in a radioactive tango. Imagine a tiny cold room filled with dusty beakers, bubbling vats of chemicals, and piles of rocks that looked like they belonged in a witch's cauldron, not a Nobel Prize-winning lab. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals and the faint hum of old equipment. But safety? That was a laughable concept. She and Pierre worked endlessly, often through the night, grinding tons of pitchblende ore to extract microscopic amounts of radium and polonium. This wasn't a quick job. It was backbreaking, slow, and required the patience of a saint or a genius who didn't have time for nonsense. She once described the process as extracting a needle from a haystack, except the haystack is radioactive and might kill you. And here's where the dark humor kicks in. Safety precautions, minimal. Protective gear, non-existent. Marie often carried test tubes full of radioactive material in her pocket, unaware that she was basically storing tiny glowing bombs on her person. Scientists today might faint at the thought, but Marie's era was blissfully ignorant about the real risks of radiation exposure. The irony, the very stuff that was helping her unlock the mysteries of the atom, was silently attacking her own body. There's a famous story that Pierre Curie, her husband and partner in discovery, was once so fascinated by the glowing nature of radium that he suggested painting watches and clocks with it, so people could tell the time in the dark. The idea took off for a while, until it didn't. Thousands of factory workers, mainly women known as the Radium Girls, painted watch dials with luminous paint, only to suffer terrible radiation poisoning. But the Curies in their scientific bubble didn't realize the full implications. Marie herself suffered severe health problems. Later in life, hair loss, chronic fatigue, and ultimately a plastic anemia, likely caused by her long exposure to radioactive materials. She was glowing bright, sometimes literally, but the cost was steep. Yet, she never stopped working, driven by a relentless passion that made the idea of quitting unthinkable. Her lab life wasn't all doom and gloom, though. It was filled with moments of discovery that rocked the scientific world and set new standards for research. Marie's dogged determination made her a role model for generations of scientists, especially women who saw in her a path forged by sheer will and genius, despite society's doubts. But behind the glow-in-the-dark fame and the Nobel trophies, Marie Curie's story is also a cautionary tale about the price of pushing boundaries. sometimes without knowing just how far you're risking yourself. Winning one Nobel Prize is a career-defining moment. Winning two. That's the kind of achievement that turns you into a scientific legend and makes your name practically synonymous with genius. Marie Curie didn't just win two Nobels, she basically owned them before anyone else could even get a look. But as with many things in her life, the road to glory wasn't exactly smooth or drama-free. It came with its own set of twists, turns, and eyebrow-raising moments. Her first Nobel Prize came in 1903, awarded jointly to her, her husband Pierre, and Henri Becquerel for their pioneering work on radioactivity. It was a huge deal, the kind of recognition that made heads in the scientific community swivel in admiration. But even at this high point, the journey wasn't all bouquets and applause. When the Nobel Committee initially announced the prize, there was some debate about whether Marie should even be included. At the time, women in science were often dismissed or overlooked, no matter how groundbreaking their work was. Imagine the sexism of the era. The Marie Curie is a genius narrative was met with some skepticism because, how could a woman be responsible for such a monumental discovery? The fact that she was not only a woman but also an immigrant from Poland didn't help her case, but Pierre stood firmly by her side, making sure the Nobel Committee knew just who deserved credit. Thanks to him, Marie's name was officially included, and the world finally had to face the reality that she was not just a lab assistant, but a brilliant physicist in her own right. Fast forward a few years, and Marie's relentless work on radium and polonium earned her a second Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1911. This time, it was all hers. No co-winners, no qualifiers. She became the first person ever to win Nobel Prizes in two different sciences. That's like being the LeBron James and Serena Williams of the scientific world rolled into one. But with great fame comes great controversy. Around the same time, Marie's personal life was splashed across the tabloids in what could only be described as an early 20th century scandal. After Pierre's tragic death in 1906, Marie's relationship with physicist Paul Langevin, who was still married, became the subject of gossip and public outrage. The press was ruthless, portraying her as a home-wrecking femme fatale. Imagine the headlines: "Radioactive Woman Sparks Scandal," or "Marie Curie, Genius or Heartbreaker." The irony was thick. Here was a woman who literally gave her life to science, glowing with intellect and courage, getting roasted by society for daring to have a love life after tragedy. The French media turned on her, and some members of the scientific community even tried to distance themselves from her. But Marie refused to be silenced or shamed. She kept working, kept shining literally, and eventually the world moved on because science doesn't care about gossip, no matter how juicy. Despite the drama, her second Nobel win cemented her place in history. It wasn't just about the prizes or the glory. It was about breaking barriers in a world that had plenty of doors locked tight against women, immigrants, and trailblazers. Marie Curie was a living proof that brilliance knows no gender, nationality, or scandal. So while the Nobel Prizes were the shiny trophies on her shelf, they also marked the peaks of a tumultuous journey filled with brilliance, heartbreak, and a good dose of "can you believe this is real life" moments. It's a reminder that even the greatest minds have to fight their own battles, sometimes in the lab, sometimes in the court of public opinion. Marie Curie's legacy didn't just fade away with her Nobel speeches and scientific papers. It exploded like one of those radioactive elements she discovered, except much safer to be around mostly. The discoveries she made opened doors to entirely new fields, and, spoiler alert, they still influence us every day. You might not realize it, but without Curie's work, your doctor wouldn't be able to zap tumors with radiation therapy, and your dentist might still be stuck pulling teeth without any numbing options. After her death, in 1934, Marie Curie's research became the foundation for modern nuclear physics and medicine. Hospitals around the world adopted radiotherapy as a key cancer treatment, using radiation to shrink tumors and save lives. So the next time you see a superhero in a hospital cape, or just your friendly neighborhood oncologist, thank Marie for making it possible. Of course, back then they didn't fully grasp how dangerous radioactivity could be. Marie herself suffered from radiation sickness, probably from carrying those glowing test tubes around like radioactive party favors. It was the ultimate science is cool, but also could kill you situation. Her legacy, also spread beyond medicine. During World War I, Curie wasn't content to sit on the sidelines. She rolled up her sleeves and outfitted mobile X-ray units, known as Little Curies, to help doctors diagnose battlefield injuries. Imagine being a soldier, expecting the usual battlefield horrors, and then seeing a giant machine that can basically see inside your body, like some kind of medieval sorcery. It was revolutionary, and yes, probably a bit terrifying. But despite her monumental contributions, Marie Curie's name still sparks curiosity and controversy. For one, her notebooks and personal items remain radioactive to this day. They're locked away in lead-lined boxes in museums, because, well, touching them is like giving yourself a tiny, unwanted science experiment in glowing. It's almost poetic. Her work was so powerful, even her diary needs a hazmat suit. Her story also challenges us to think about how society views women in science. She broke through barriers that felt like solid iron walls, shattering stereotypes with a mix of sheer intelligence and stubborn perseverance. And yet, even today, women in STEM fields face hurdles reminiscent of those Curie battled over a century ago. So her life isn't just a history lesson. It's a rallying cry that genius isn't bound by gender or background, even if the world tries to say otherwise. So when you hear Marie Curie's name, remember this. She wasn't just a pioneer of radioactive elements. She was a human force of nature, a woman who radiated brilliance, sometimes literally, and whose discoveries changed medicine, science, and society forever. She's the kind of legend who proves that being too bright isn't a problem. It's a superpower. Let's dive into the quirks, curiosities, and some of the lesser-known, darker sides of Marie Curie's life. The stuff textbooks usually skip because it's either too weird, too tragic, or just too radioactive to handle without a lead suit. First off, Marie Curie wasn't your average scientist quietly tinkering in a lab. She was fiercely driven, often working in conditions that would make most people run for fresh air. Imagine a cramped, poorly ventilated shed, filled with glowing chemicals, piles of dirt, and who knows what else. That's where she spent hours grinding pitchblende ore to extract tiny amounts of radium. Fun fact, the place was so radioactive, anyone who stepped inside might as well have signed up for an unplanned glow-in-the-dark party, except the invite was actually a slow invitation to radiation sickness. Speaking of which, Marie Curie's personal life paid a heavy price for her scientific curiosity. She often carried test tubes full of radioactive isotopes in her pockets, not realizing that the invisible rays were slowly attacking her body. There was no radiation safety handbook back then. If anything, the prevailing attitude was more like, science is worth dying for. Spoiler alert, it pretty much was for her. But Marie's story isn't just tragedy wrapped in glowing mystery. She had a life full of complexities, including a scandal that rocked Parisian society. After her husband Pierre's tragic death in 1906, he was literally run over by a horse-drawn cart, proving that life can be just as cruel as science. Marie faced rumors and accusations about her personal life. She had an affair with a married colleague, Paul Langevin, which the press weaponized to try to destroy her reputation. Imagine a modern-day Twitter meltdown, but with ink-stained newspapers instead of hashtags. Despite the backlash, Marie refused to let society's judgment dim her light. She kept working, kept breaking barriers, and kept being a symbol of brilliant resilience. It's hard not to admire someone who, amid scandal and heartbreak, managed to push forward discoveries that changed the world. And the irony, while Marie's discoveries revolutionized medicine, the radioactivity that saved lives also claimed hers. She died from aplastic anemia, a blood disease likely caused by prolonged radiation exposure. So in the end, her work was both her greatest gift to humanity and the quiet assassin lurking in her lab coat. Lastly, the legacy of her discoveries carries a strange, almost haunting echo. Her notebooks and letters are still so radioactive that they require special handling, kind of like historical documents crossed with a mild hazardous waste site. It's the ultimate handle with care label. Marie Curie's life reminds us that great discoveries often come with great risks, and that sometimes the cost of progress is paid in ways science can't always predict. It's a story full of brilliance, heartbreak, controversy, and that oddly beautiful, dangerous glow that still captivates us today. Marie Curie's discovery of radium and polonium didn't just stay locked in the lab notebooks. It exploded into fields as varied as medicine, energy, and even pop culture. Yes, pop culture. And not always in a good way. To understand the scale, imagine this. Before Marie, radiation was this mysterious invisible force. After her, it became a sort of scientific celebrity, with people both worshipping and fearing its power. One of the biggest leaps was in medicine. Radiotherapy emerged as a miracle weapon against cancer, using controlled doses of radiation to zap tumors without the need for a medieval torture chamber of knives and potions. This was revolutionary, literally changing how doctors approached treatment. But there was a catch. Early radiation treatments were as much a gamble as a cure. Doctors didn't fully understand the long-term effects, so sometimes the cure was almost as scary as the disease. Still, thanks to Curie's groundwork, this gamble saved countless lives and paved the way for modern oncology. Then there's the darker flip side, the rise of nuclear weapons. While Marie Curie herself was a pacifist, the knowledge of radioactivity eventually led to the atomic bomb. The ultimate don't try this at home invention. The irony is bitter. The same science that could heal also had the power to destroy entire cities in a flash. It's like discovering fire and then accidentally setting your own house on fire. Her discoveries didn't cause this directly, but the chain reaction was set in motion by the knowledge she helped unlock. Radioactivity also found its way into consumer products. Yeah, you heard that right. In the early 1900s, radium was a hot ingredient in everything from glowing watch dials to health tonics. People thought radioactive water and creams could make you healthier. Spoiler, it didn't. It just made you glow, and then, well, get very sick. The infamous radium girls were factory workers who painted watch faces with radium paint and suffered serious health issues because nobody told them the stuff was basically poison. It's one of history's most tragic examples of science gone wrong and a harsh lesson in workplace safety. Even in pop culture, the fascination with radioactivity took off. Comic book heroes like the Hulk and the Fantastic Four owe their origins to this mid-century obsession with mutation and radiation. Science fiction began imagining worlds transformed by radioactive powers, sometimes as saviors, sometimes as monsters. All of it traces back to that first discovery of a little glowing element in a tiny Polish lab. And let's not forget the energy sector. Nuclear power plants, which provide a significant chunk of the world's electricity, owe their existence to Curie's pioneering work. It's a cleaner alternative to fossil fuels, but still comes with risks, like the potential for catastrophic meltdowns. In other words, it's the love it or fear it technology of the modern era. So, Marie Curie's discovery of radioactivity wasn't just a scientific milestone, it was the opening act in a century-long drama full of promise, peril, and paradox. It's a story of brilliance that literally changed the world's energy, health, and culture, proving that some discoveries come with consequences as big as their impact. Marie Curie wasn't just the brilliant mind behind radium and polonium. She was also a wife, a mother and a woman, navigating the rigid expectations of early 20th century society. Balancing a demanding scientific career with motherhood was no walk in the park. In fact, it was more like sprinting through a minefield wearing high heels. Her husband, Pierre Curie, was not just her partner in life, but also in science. Their collaboration was famously symbiotic, with Pierre's expertise in magnetism complementing Marie's chemistry skills. Together, they made the discoveries that rocked the scientific world. But tragedy struck early when Pierre was killed in a street accident in 1906. Run over by a horse-drawn carriage in Paris, no less. Suddenly, Marie was a widow with 2 young daughters and a mountain of responsibility. Instead of stepping back, she stepped up, becoming the first woman to teach at the prestigious Sorbonne University. Imagine walking into a male-dominated institution as the first female professor. She had to not only prove her brilliance, but also fight the unspoken sexism of her time. And she did it all while raising her daughters, Irene and F, often working late into the night in her lab. Her life at home wasn't all quiet science either. Marie was a devoted mother, but she also faced criticism for spending so much time in her lab. Back then, the idea of a woman neglecting her domestic duties for a career was scandalous. She managed to blend maternal care with intellectual curiosity, encouraging her daughters to pursue education and independence. Irene would follow in her footsteps, winning a Nobel Prize of her own because apparently genius runs in the family. Meanwhile, Ambrose took a different path, becoming a writer and journalist. proving that the Curie legacy wasn't just about test tubes and radium. It was also about courage and breaking molds in various fields. Despite her fame, Marie Curie's personal life wasn't without controversy. After Pierre's death, rumors swirled about her relationships, including a scandalous affair with a fellow scientist, which the media twisted into a circus. The public wasn't quite ready to accept a brilliant woman with a complicated personal life. It was a tough time, but she kept her focus on her work and her family. Her story shows that greatness doesn't come without struggle, especially for women breaking barriers. She juggled grief, public scrutiny, and the demanding roles of mother and scientist, all while pushing humanity forward in science. And her legacy, it didn't stop with her daughters. Marie's discoveries laid the foundation for entire fields of research. Her family continued to shape science and culture, and her story remains a beacon for anyone fighting to balance passion and responsibility in a world eager to put people in boxes. Marie Curie's life was anything but ordinary. She smashed scientific ceilings, survived personal tragedies, and juggled motherhood with a career that literally changed the world, while most of us can barely manage cooking dinner without setting off the smoke alarm. Her discoveries paved the way for modern medicine, revolutionized physics, and inspired generations of scientists, especially women who dared to dream beyond society's narrow expectations. But maybe the most remarkable thing about Marie wasn't just her radium or her Nobel Prizes. It was her relentless curiosity and resilience. She showed us that brilliance often comes wrapped in struggle, that failure is just part of the journey, and that sometimes you have to glow in the dark to truly shine. So next time you flick on an X-ray machine or hear about groundbreaking research, remember Marie Curie, the woman who made it possible, often at great personal cost. She didn't just light up the scientific world, she sparked a legacy that still burns bright today. And if you ever think your day is tough, just remember, Marie Curie dealt with radioactive materials without even knowing it was dangerous. That's commitment, or a very bad case of, oops, didn't read the manual.